While I was writing the introduction to this group of videos, I found myself talking about this car. I was talking about the difference between this one and the red car I actually used, that this car was shot on grass, and sometimes when the grass is long, the grass can encroach onto the tyres and give us a little bit of a problem if we wanted to cut the car out and place it against another background. But then I thought, well, why don't I just make a short video and tack this on the bottom so you've got something to view should you wish to do so. So this is the car that I chose to cut out from the background, a little bit more intricate than the red car. There's lots of little bits and pieces down sitting behind the front bumper which I had to deal with. So I eventually ended up with the basic cutout done. Let me close this one down. But as you can see, I've left an overspill around the front tyre and a little bit around the back as well. So let me demonstrate how we can deal with these tyres. It's not difficult work, but it just takes just a little time and we have to do it carefully. Sometimes it may even be better to do this once we've chosen a background for the car, because I've found that generally speaking, the bottom of the tyres and the shadow beneath the car need to be fairly strong, so the bottom of the tyres can be quite dark and they just look natural. But what I'm going to do here is to make a selection of the front tyre, because the technique we're going to use here is the same for anything of a similar nature. I suppose we could use similar techniques to actually guess where the edge of the tyre goes and use either the masking technique I described with the red car or even use the polygonal lasso tool. But what I'm going to do here is demonstrate the process that I've used a few times. It works for me. I'm going to go to my selection tools and I'm going to select the elliptical marquee tool. Now if I draw an oval shape, you can see that I can move it around and I can get it roughly in position, but of course it's a bit of a problem because it needs to be rotated and adjusted. Well, we can do that using our select options from the top of the screen. It's called transform selection, and we get a bounding box appearing around the outer edge of the selection we have made. Now if we go outside the bounding box, we've got two linked arrows which enable us to rotate it, and we can drag any of the toggles to get the selection into the correct place. Now I just usually use a very sophisticated system to get this selection lined up. I follow my nose. I can see that the wheel needs to be, or my selection needs to be rotated a little bit. So I'm going to do that first of all. I'm going to drag the top up to more or less the top of the wheel, and I'll start there. You can see the selection getting near the edge. And down the bottom I'm going to do the same. This one I want to bring in more or less to the edge of that tyre, because that's the edge I want to follow. So I think I've gone too far up there, so let's bring that down a little bit. But maybe I need it to come out somewhere like that. You can see the tyre is not quite right, so maybe I've got to rotate a little more. See it come closer? Now maybe drag it out a little bit, tilt a little more. And you can see that selection gradually dropping into place. Let's get it around the edge of that tyre. I think that looks okay. I think perhaps I've rotated too much. Let's go back a bit. Yeah. And this needs to be dragged in, I think, to the edge. I'm having a little difficulty here, and I think it may be because I've got the snap command turned on. So I'm going to go to my view menu and turn that off just for a moment and just zoom in a little more. I was just having difficulty in moving it into that position. Turning the snap command off, as you can see, made that pretty easy. Snap command is very useful most of the time, but there are the occasional time when we need it turned off. To be honest, I think I've more or less got what I need. In fact, I think I may just come away a little bit there, maybe just a touch. So when I'm happy with this, I'm going to hit the tick on the options, and I'm going to save my selection just in case I need it again, because it took me a little while to create it. So let's make sure we've got it saved with the image. Again, it's a selection, so go to the select menu, save selection, well, front wheel. Now if I save this image, I can open it up in the future and retrieve that very same selection. At the moment, the selection is selected on the inner part. What I want, first of all, is to wipe away what I don't want here. So I may as well use the mask that I still have in my layers. So I need to inverse the selection. Now we can do this with Control-Shift-I, or once again, because it's a selection, go back to the select menu and inverse. Now it doesn't look any different when we've got the image enlarged like this, but if I just temporarily hit Control-0, you can see we've got a bounding box around the outer edge of the image. So in actual fact, we've got everything in the image selected apart from the tyre. If I do Control-Shift-I, you can see what we originally created. Now we've got just the tyre selected. So going back to my Control-Shift-I, I can soften the edge of that selection just a little bit. We don't want it too sharp. So select a mask. A couple of pixels is probably all I need. So if I go to my layers and select the mask, I'm going to need to pick up black and another soft edge brush. But this is going to be pretty easy because I can push the flow rate up to 100% because I've got the protection of my selection there, and there we've got the curve dealt with down in that position. Now I need to reverse the selection again, inverse, so that I can do the little gap down here and the bit down here. And also I don't want a selection on my mask, but if I go to this layer, it's a smart object and I cannot clone onto a smart object, but I can clone onto a new blank layer. So if you don't want to lose the smart object status of your image, then go down to the bottom, create a new blank layer, and I'm going to, I think straight away I'll go in quite close up here. I'm going to go to my clone tool. You can see I've got from the options here, I've got current and below. The default is generally current layer, so take a look at that. I'm going to put my flow rate up here up to 100% because I've got this little icon checked. I can do that by touching the 0 key. And I can drop my brush down to a reasonable size. Now I can Alt click to sample. Got a couple of little marks here and it's not dealing with them. Now the reason my clone tool is not working is because I've forgotten to inverse my selection. So everything is selected this side of the selection and not this. So either Control-Shift-I or select inverse, come back, sample, and we can paint them out. For the edge, I can make my brush a little bigger because it's the same tone all the way along there, and I can just paint in using a flow rate of about, or an opacity of about 100%. Now you can see how easy it is to paint in that lovely edge protected by the selection. When I come down here, we start to get a slightly lighter part of the tyre, but I'm probably going to end up darkening that. I think I did when I created the image, but you can see I've got down quite a long way. But now we've got a problem with the grass sticking up, and sometimes if we use the clone tool we just clone the bits of grass further down. So this is where I may switch to maybe the spot healing brush, and once again just make sure you have a brush which is suitable for the job, and you've got the little box here ticked to sample all layers. So although we're sampling from here, we're painting onto our new blank layer. So we're going to paint these out, just these little bits that are sticking up. Let's go down. There's a couple of other marks I may as well deal with while I'm here. And as I said a little while ago, I think the bottom of this tyre is going to be so black by the time I've finished it, you'll hardly see it because it's going to drift into the shadow that I place at the bottom of the car. But I think what I can possibly do now is to go back to my clone tool and maybe drop the brush down, sample, and I can start to work my way down. This should peter out up there, but I don't really think it's going to be a bit of a problem for us because of what I said about needing to make the bottom really dark. So down here I suppose I could start thinking about cloning from here and doing it slightly differently, but knowing what I know, I'm not going to be too fussy. And then maybe we can just do this to bring that tyre down to the bottom. Well, those are the techniques that we need. And of course, if I hit Control D to remove that selection, now we can see we've got a beautiful shape of the tyre, and I don't think anyone would notice that, particularly when we put a gradient underneath the car for the car to stand on. One thing perhaps I should say in relation to the smart object. In some respects, we can often say that if we're going to place a new blank layer above a smart object because we need the blank layer to do all of the repairs, then we may as well dispense with the smart object. Because if the repairs that I'd done were elsewhere on the car, maybe up here on the bodywork, if I double click that smart object, took it back into Camera Raw and adjusted the contrast or density in any way, then of course the repairs that I've made would show up like a sore thumb. So there's two ways to look at this. You could say, well, we could have just rasterized this layer and done the repairs directly on the layer. But then again, it's always good to do them on a new blank layer, particularly when we're doing this sort of work for the first time, because if you get it wrong, you've got the opportunity to repair it. But at some stage, of course, you would need to add the repairs to the tyre to the image below. The techniques to deal with the rear tyre would be exactly the same, and because it's much darker at the bottom, I'd suggest that that one may be marginally easier.